Edit. You'd make a great bride. The single dad said. The CEO's answer left him speechless. What kind of answer could leave a single dad completely speechless? And what was said that made this moment so unforgettable? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are truly happy that you are here to enjoy another heartfelt story filled with warmth, dignity, and unexpected moments. If you enjoy inspiring stories that stay with you long after they end, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for your kindness, your support, and for being part of this wonderful community. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what would your honest response be if someone sincerely said, "You'd make a great bride"? Now, let us step into the beginning of this unforgettable story together. Sometimes the smallest sentence opens the biggest door, but only if two hearts are brave enough to hear it. Ethan Brooks tightened the final screw on a wooden bookshelf as cheerful laughter echoed through the neighborhood community center outside Portland, Oregon. The annual Family Volunteer Fair had become a tradition for local residents, filling the crisp Saturday morning with the scent of fresh coffee, homemade apple pie, and the comforting sound of children chasing one another beneath strings of colorful paper decorations. 8-year-old Lily Brooks hurried across the room, carrying a stack of donated storybooks almost as tall as she was. "Daddy, where do these go?" she asked with a bright smile. Ethan wiped the sawdust from his hands and pointed toward the reading corner, right beside the little blue chair. "Thank you, sweetheart." Raising Lily alone had never been the future he imagined, yet every ordinary day reminded him that love was not measured by what life took away, but by what remained. He worked full-time maintaining school buildings for the local district, repaired neighbors' broken furniture whenever they needed help, and still found time every weekend to volunteer because he believed kindness should never depend on someone's bank account. While Lily happily arranged the books by color instead of alphabet because she insisted it looked friendlier, Ethan carried another box toward the entrance. That was when he noticed a woman standing quietly beside the donation table. She wore a simple cream sweater, dark blue jeans, and comfortable white sneakers. Nothing about her clothing suggested wealth or influence. Instead, she patiently listened to an elderly volunteer explain how every donated blanket would help a family through the coming winter. She thanked the woman with genuine appreciation before carefully folding each blanket herself instead of asking someone else to do it. Ethan smiled to himself. People revealed their character through little things. A few moments later, Lily wandered over to him and whispered just loudly enough for nearby volunteers to hear, "Daddy, she is really pretty." Ethan laughed softly. "She certainly is." Lily tilted her head with the innocent curiosity only children possessed. "Why do you think she is not married?" Ethan glanced toward the woman, never expecting she was close enough to overhear every word. With an easy grin, he shrugged and answered playfully, "Maybe because no one has been smart enough yet. You would make a great bride." The woman slowly turned toward him. For a heartbeat, the busy room seemed strangely quiet. Ethan immediately realized she had heard him and felt warmth rise into his cheeks. Before he could apologize for the unexpected comment, she met his eyes with calm confidence and a smile that carried both grace and sincerity. "Actually," she said gently, "I have been waiting for someone exactly like you." Ethan stood completely speechless. Lily looked from her father to the woman before breaking into delighted laughter. Around them, volunteers continued arranging tables and unpacking donations, unaware that one ordinary conversation had quietly changed direction. The woman stepped closer and extended her hand. "I am Charlotte," she said. Ethan accepted the handshake with the same honest respect he offered every stranger. "I am Ethan." Neither of them mentioned careers, success, or accomplishments. To Ethan, she was simply a thoughtful woman who had answered an unexpected joke with remarkable composure. To Charlotte Hayes, the White American chief executive officer whose face appeared in national business magazines and financial interviews across the country, Ethan Brooks was the first man in years who had looked directly at her without seeing power, wealth, or influence. He had only seen another human being. And somehow that simple kindness felt more extraordinary than every award waiting inside her corner office. Charlotte held Ethan's hand for only a brief moment before letting go, yet the warmth of that simple greeting stayed with both of them long after they stepped back into the cheerful rhythm of the volunteer fair. Lily immediately adopted Charlotte as though they had known each other for years. "Would you like to help me organize the children's books?" she asked with complete confidence. Charlotte smiled. "I would love to." The two of them settled beside the reading corner, while Ethan returned to repairing a loose cabinet door near the kitchen. Every few minutes he glanced toward Lily and noticed how naturally she laughed around Charlotte. It was a sound he treasured because raising a child alone had taught him that happiness often arrived quietly instead of all at once. Across the room, Charlotte found herself forgetting every unread email waiting on her phone. She listened as Lily proudly explained why fairy tales belonged beside adventure books because, in her opinion, every great adventure began with hope. Charlotte laughed softly. "That may be the smartest way anyone has ever organized a library." Lily grinned. "Daddy says books are like people. You should never judge them by the cover." Charlotte looked toward Ethan for a moment. He was patiently helping an elderly volunteer repair the handle on a donation card, instead of taking a break for himself. Nobody had asked him to do it. He simply noticed it needed fixing. The small act told her more about his character than any impressive introduction ever could. By early afternoon, the scent of grilled hamburgers drifted across the community center courtyard as families gathered around folding tables for lunch. Ethan carried 3 paper plates back from the serving line and handed one to Charlotte without hesitation. "I hope you like potato salad," he said with an easy smile. "It is the specialty around here." Charlotte accepted the plate with genuine gratitude. Anything shared with kindness usually tastes better. They spent the next hour talking about ordinary things. Ethan spoke about growing up in Oregon, coaching Lily's Little League softball team during the spring, and the satisfaction of repairing something instead of replacing it. Charlotte never mentioned board meetings, corporate acquisitions, or the skyscraper office overlooking downtown Portland. Instead, she asked questions that revealed sincere curiosity rather than polite conversation. She wanted to know what made Ethan choose volunteer work every weekend when he already worked full-time. Ethan looked toward Lily, who was helping younger children decorate paper pumpkins with bright markers. "Because I want her to grow up believing that generosity is something you practice, not something you talk about." Charlotte quietly lowered her eyes. Those words reached a place inside her that years of professional success never had. Late that afternoon, as volunteers folded tables and packed away supplies, Charlotte's phone vibrated several times inside her sweater pocket. She glanced at the screen, saw messages from her executive assistant marked urgent, and silently turned the phone off without reading them. Ethan noticed the gesture, but said nothing. To him, it simply looked like someone choosing to stay present instead of letting work interrupt a meaningful day. As the autumn sunlight settled across the parking lot, Charlotte realized that for the first time in many years, she had spent an entire day feeling valued not because of what she had accomplished, but because of who she had quietly become while standing beside a kind single father and his remarkable little girl. Monday morning arrived with a blanket of gray clouds hanging over downtown Portland as Charlotte Hayes stepped out of a quiet elevator onto the executive floor of Hayes Living headquarters. Her assistant greeted her with a warm smile and a carefully prepared schedule that included board meetings, investor calls, and interviews stretching well into the evening. Everything looked exactly as it had every Monday for years, yet something inside Charlotte felt unmistakably different. As she walked past framed awards, polished conference rooms, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, she found herself remembering the laughter inside the little community center instead of the conversations waiting behind closed office doors. During the first executive meeting of the day, senior directors discussed expansion plans, financial forecasts, and new acquisition opportunities. Charlotte listened attentively, but when someone asked for her opinion, she paused for several quiet seconds. In her mind, she saw Lily arranging books by color because it made the room feel happier. She remembered Ethan repairing an old donation card without anyone asking him to help. Those simple memories carried more weight than the impressive presentation displayed across the enormous screen. Charlotte finally offered her recommendations, and the meeting continued successfully, but even her closest colleagues noticed a new calm in the way she spoke. Later that afternoon, she opened the drawer of her desk and found herself smiling at a small paper bookmark Lily had slipped into her pocket before leaving the community center. It was decorated with uneven stars, bright crayons, and the handwritten words, "Thank you for helping people." Charlotte gently placed it beside a framed business award and quietly realized which one mattered more to her heart. Across town, Ethan finished repairing classroom desks at an elementary school before driving to pick Lily up from her after-school art club. The familiar sound of his aging pickup truck echoed through the school parking lot as Lily climbed inside, carrying another stack of colorful drawings. "Do you think Charlotte will come back next Saturday?" she asked hopefully while fastening her seatbelt. Ethan smiled as he pulled onto the quiet neighborhood street. "I think she enjoyed helping everyone. Maybe she will." Lily looked thoughtfully through the window. "I think she smiles because she wants other people to feel happy, but sometimes she forgets to be happy herself." Ethan glanced toward his daughter with quiet surprise. Children often noticed what adults overlooked. "You might be right," he admitted gently. The thought stayed with him throughout the evening as they prepared dinner together and talked about school, volunteer work, and the week ahead. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat alone in her apartment overlooking the city lights. Expensive furniture filled every room, yet the silence felt unusually heavy. Without thinking twice, she opened the community center website and registered to volunteer again the following Saturday, using only her first name. She wanted to return not as a chief executive officer, not as someone recognized by headlines or business magazines, but simply as Charlotte. When Saturday finally arrived, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee welcomed her before she even stepped through the front door. Ethan looked up from assembling a new bookshelf and smiled with genuine warmth. "Good morning. I was hoping you would come back." Charlotte smiled in return, realizing that those simple words carried more meaning than countless formal greetings she heard every day in boardrooms where everyone knew her title, but very few truly knew her. The Saturdays that followed settled into a quiet rhythm that none of them had planned, yet all three of them began looking forward to each new weekend with the same quiet anticipation. Ethan always arrived before sunrise to repair whatever needed attention around the community center before the first families walked through the doors. Sometimes he replaced a broken shelf in the pantry. Other times he fixed a loose handrail or assembled donated furniture that would soon find a home with a family starting over. Charlotte usually arrived carrying fresh muffins from a neighborhood bakery, hot coffee for the volunteers, or boxes of children's art supplies purchased from a small local business, because she believed helping communities meant supporting them in every possible way. She never brought expensive gifts, and she never mentioned that she could have written a single check large enough to solve many of the center's financial problems. Ethan admired that about her without realizing why. Lily quickly decided that every Saturday belonged to the three of them together. She insisted Charlotte join every craft activity, every story hour, and every cleanup project, proudly introducing her to newcomers as though she had always been part of their little volunteer family. One cool autumn afternoon, after the last donation box had been stacked inside the storage room, the three of them walked to a nearby park carrying warm apple cider from a small roadside stand. Golden leaves drifted gently across the walking path, while children laughed from a nearby playground. Lily ran ahead collecting colorful maple leaves, determined to find the brightest one for her scrapbook. Ethan and Charlotte followed at an easy pace, comfortable enough that silence no longer felt awkward between them. After watching Lily skip toward a wooden bridge, Charlotte quietly asked, "Have you always believed people are naturally good?" Ethan smiled thoughtfully before answering, "I think most people want to be. Sometimes life simply makes them forget." Charlotte looked down at the cup warming her hands. "And what reminds them?" Ethan watched an elderly man help a little boy retrieve a kite caught in a tree before replying, "Usually another kind person." Charlotte did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched the scene unfold beneath the amber trees and wondered how someone with so little could carry such quiet wisdom. After a few moments, she asked another question. "Do you ever regret choosing such a simple life?" Ethan laughed softly. "Simple does not mean easy, but it gives me room to notice what matters." He nodded toward Lily, who was now proudly holding up a bright red leaf as though she had discovered treasure. "If I spent every day chasing more, I might miss moments like that." Charlotte followed his gaze and smiled with genuine warmth. For years she had filled calendars, airplanes, conferences, and boardrooms, believing achievement would eventually create peace. Yet peace had quietly found her instead on an ordinary walking trail beside a father who measured wealth by completely different standards. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the colorful branches, Lily hurried back, carrying 3 matching maple leaves. She handed one to Ethan, one to Charlotte, and kept the last for herself. "Now we all have one," she announced proudly. Ethan tucked his leaf inside his jacket pocket. Charlotte carefully placed hers inside the notebook she always carried. Neither adult realized that the small keepsake would remain there for a very long time, quietly reminding them that the strongest connections are rarely built through extraordinary moments, but through ordinary days shared with honesty, kindness, and the gentle courage to simply keep showing up. As October slowly gave way to November, the community center grew busier with preparations for its annual winter outreach program. Volunteers sorted warm coats, packed canned food into sturdy cardboard boxes, and collected blankets for families facing the colder months ahead. Ethan spent most of Saturday morning repairing old wooden shelves so they could safely hold hundreds of donated supplies, while Lily carefully taped handwritten notes of encouragement inside every food box, because she believed kind words could warm people almost as much as thick blankets. Charlotte quietly joined them before sunrise, carrying several boxes filled with children's gloves and knitted hats purchased from a small local business. She placed them beside the donation table without mentioning where they had come from or how much they had cost. To her, generosity was most meaningful when it arrived without recognition. Ethan noticed the thoughtful selection instead of the price. "You always seem to know exactly what people need," he said while lifting one of the boxes onto a shelf. Charlotte smiled gently. "Sometimes all we have to do is pay attention." Throughout the morning, they worked side by side with the comfortable rhythm of people who no longer felt like strangers. They packed meals, organized supplies, and welcomed every family with the same quiet respect regardless of appearance or circumstance. Around lunchtime, the director of the community center approached Charlotte carrying a clipboard. "Would you mind helping us review next month's fundraiser plans?" she asked. Charlotte nodded without hesitation and disappeared into a small office near the entrance. Ethan remained outside stacking donation boxes into neat rows. A few minutes later, a sleek black sedan quietly stopped across the street. 2 professionally dressed men stepped out, glanced toward the building, and exchanged a few words before waiting beside the vehicle. Ethan noticed them, but assumed they were meeting someone else. Inside the office, Charlotte's executive assistant placed a folder on the desk. "The board approved moving the strategy meeting," she said quietly. "However, several directors are becoming concerned about your repeated weekend absences." Charlotte looked through the window toward Ethan, who was laughing as Lily proudly balanced 3 empty boxes on top of her head like a playful hat. A warm smile crossed Charlotte's face before she answered. "Tell them I will be there Monday morning." The assistant hesitated. "There is something else." A local business reporter recognized the company vehicle last weekend. "Questions are starting to circulate." Charlotte remained calm. "Then let them ask." When the brief conversation ended, she returned outside carrying nothing but the peaceful expression Ethan had come to recognize. Neither he nor Lily asked where she had been. They simply handed her another roll of packing tape and continued working together. As the afternoon came to a close, one of the waiting executives accidentally addressed her within Ethan's hearing. "Ms. Hayes, the board will expect your decision before tomorrow evening." Ethan looked up for only a second before returning to the donation boxes. He assumed she worked somewhere important, perhaps in management at a large company, but he did not ask another question. Charlotte quietly noticed his reaction and felt both relieved and unsettled. He still saw only the woman who spent Saturdays serving beside him, yet the distance between her quiet weekends and her public life was narrowing with every passing day. She gently slipped the bright maple leaf Lily had given her weeks earlier into her notebook once again, silently wondering how much longer she could protect the ordinary happiness they had found before the truth inevitably stepped into the light. Monday arrived with steady rain tapping softly against the towering windows of Hayes' living headquarters as Charlotte Hayes stepped into the executive boardroom, carrying nothing except a leather notebook with a single pressed maple leaf tucked safely inside. Around the polished conference table, directors reviewed quarterly reports, expansion plans, and investment projections with practiced confidence. Numbers filled enormous screens while discussions revolved around market growth and future acquisitions. Charlotte listened patiently until the chairman invited her to present the company's charitable strategy for the coming year. Instead of beginning with charts, she quietly closed the presentation on the screen. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Charlotte folded her hands and spoke with calm conviction. Every number we celebrate represents a human life somewhere. If we forget that, then success becomes nothing more than arithmetic. The room fell completely silent. She described the volunteers she had met over the past several weeks, the families rebuilding their lives with quiet dignity, and the children who believed handwritten notes belonged inside every donation box because encouragement mattered just as much as food. One director leaned forward. Who inspired this change in perspective? Charlotte smiled gently without revealing too much. A single father who never realized he was teaching me. Across town, Ethan spent his morning replacing worn classroom shelves before helping a kindergarten teacher repair a reading corner that had served generations of students. He enjoyed work that left something stronger than it had been before. Every tightened screw and carefully measured board reminded him that patient effort often created lasting results. That afternoon, he picked Lily up from school, where she climbed into the pickup truck carrying a construction paper turkey decorated with bright feathers. "I made one for Charlotte, too," she said proudly. Ethan smiled. "I think she will love it." Lily looked thoughtful as they drove home beneath gray skies. "Daddy, do you think people with really important jobs ever get lonely?" Ethan considered the question before answering. "Sometimes the higher someone climbs, the fewer people they meet who speak to them honestly." Lily nodded quietly, looking out the window as raindrops slid across the glass. Saturday finally arrived, bringing cold air and clear blue skies after a week of rain. The community center welcomed dozens of volunteers preparing Thanksgiving meal boxes for local families. Charlotte arrived carrying homemade pumpkin bread from a neighborhood bakery, and the familiar warmth between the three of them returned almost immediately. They worked together for hours, laughing over crooked labels and Lily's determination to place a cheerful drawing inside every single food basket. Late in the afternoon, Ethan stepped outside to load completed boxes into a delivery van. Across the street, he noticed the same black executive sedan waiting once again. This time, a local business reporter stood nearby, speaking quietly with one of Charlotte's assistants while occasionally glancing toward the community center. Ethan frowned slightly but thought little of it. Charlotte followed his gaze and immediately understood what was happening. The quiet world they had shared was beginning to attract attention from the public life she had tried so carefully to keep separate. She looked toward Ethan, who was helping an elderly volunteer lift a heavy box with the same quiet respect he showed everyone. A gentle concern settled in her heart because she knew the truth would soon arrive, and she feared it would test something far more valuable than trust. She feared it would ask whether two people from completely different worlds could still choose each other after every hidden truth had finally been revealed. The following Saturday began like every other one, with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the community center and volunteers greeting one another by name. But beneath the familiar routine, an invisible change was quietly waiting to unfold. Ethan arrived before sunrise with Lily, spending the first hour repairing a damaged storage cabinet before helping organize the Thanksgiving meal deliveries. Charlotte joined them carrying homemade cinnamon rolls from the same neighborhood bakery she always visited, smiling as Lily rushed forward to give her a warm hug. For several peaceful hours, everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Families collected food boxes, children colored holiday cards, and neighbors shared laughter that echoed through every hallway. Ethan noticed Charlotte seemed quieter than usual. She smiled whenever Lily spoke, yet every so often her eyes wandered toward the front windows as though she expected someone to arrive. Shortly after noon, a dark executive sedan slowly pulled into the parking lot, followed a few minutes later by another vehicle marked with the logo of a local television station. Several volunteers glanced outside with quiet curiosity. Before anyone could ask questions, two reporters stepped onto the sidewalk, carrying cameras and microphones, while a producer spoke briefly with Charlotte's executive assistant near the entrance. Ethan looked toward Charlotte with a puzzled expression. She took a slow breath, knowing the quiet separation between her two lives had finally come to an end. One reporter politely approached the volunteer director before asking if they could speak with Charlotte Hayes regarding the company's expanding community investment initiative. The name caught everyone's attention. Conversations gradually faded until only the distant laughter of children remained. Ethan stood motionless beside a table stacked with canned food, trying to connect the woman he had spent countless Saturdays serving beside with the name now being repeated by every reporter outside. Lily gently tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, they keep calling Charlotte Miss Hayes." Ethan nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the entrance. Charlotte walked outside before anyone else could answer the questions for her. She thanked the reporters for waiting, briefly explained that the day's focus should remain on the volunteers and the families receiving support, and declined every attempt to make herself the center of attention. Even then, cameras continued following her respectful words. Finally, one reporter noticed Ethan standing nearby and asked politely, "Sir, how long have you known the Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Living?" Ethan blinked in genuine surprise. "Chief Executive Officer?" he repeated quietly. The words sounded almost unreal. Charlotte walked directly toward him, her calm expression carrying both honesty and quiet concern. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said softly. "I never wanted my position to become the reason we met." For several long moments Ethan said nothing at all. The parking lot seemed strangely still as autumn leaves drifted across the pavement. He looked at Charlotte, then at the waiting cameras, and finally at Lily, who watched both adults with hopeful eyes. Ethan offered Charlotte a gentle smile, filled with the same kindness he had shown her on the very first day. "You are still the woman who packed food boxes beside my daughter," he said. Then his expression softened with quiet dignity as he added, "But your world is much bigger than mine, Charlotte. I do not think I belong in it." Without anger, without blame, and without another word, he thanked the volunteers, took Lily's hand, climbed into his old pickup truck, and slowly drove away, leaving Charlotte standing in complete silence as she realized that the greatest distance between two people was never measured by money, but by the fear that one heart might no longer believe it was enough. For the first time in months, the community center felt strangely quiet the following Saturday. Ethan still arrived before sunrise with Lily, repaired a loose handrail near the entrance, and helped unload donated groceries with the same steady dedication as always, but he politely declined every invitation to stay for coffee after the work was finished. He smiled just as warmly as before, yet there was a gentle distance in his eyes that only those who truly knew him could notice. Lily sensed it immediately. As they packed empty boxes into the back of the pickup truck, she looked up at her father and asked, "Are we not going to wait for Charlotte today?" Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder and answered softly, "Some people belong in places much bigger than ours, sweetheart. We should be grateful we met them, even if only for a little while." Lily frowned thoughtfully. "I think she liked being here more than those bigger places." Ethan did not answer because a part of him quietly believed Lily was right, but another part refused to become the reason Charlotte had to choose between her world and his. Across the city, Charlotte sat through another executive meeting where directors celebrated record earnings and applauded future expansion plans. The applause echoed through the boardroom, yet none of it reached her heart. When the meeting ended, she returned to her office, opened the top drawer of her desk, and carefully unfolded the pressed maple leaf beside Lily's handmade bookmark. She realized the two simplest gifts she owned had become more valuable than every award displayed on the surrounding shelves. Without another moment of hesitation, she canceled the remainder of her afternoon schedule. Her assistant looked surprised. "You have 3 important meetings." Charlotte smiled gently. "Today I have somewhere more important to be." Instead of asking Ethan to visit another corporate office, Charlotte drove herself to the quiet neighborhood where he and Lily lived. She found his modest white house with a small front porch, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a wooden bird feeder hanging from an old maple tree. Ethan was kneeling beside a bicycle, adjusting the chain while Lily held a flashlight, even though the afternoon sun was still bright. They both looked up as Charlotte stepped out of her car carrying nothing except the notebook that still held the maple leaf. Ethan stood slowly, clearly surprised to see her there. Charlotte walked toward him without hesitation. "I did not come as a chief executive officer," she said with calm sincerity. "I came because I miss my friends." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before quietly replying, "Charlotte, your life deserves someone who understands your world." She shook her head gently. "The person I have been searching for understands my heart, and that matters much more." She opened the notebook and showed him the carefully preserved maple leaf. "You once told me that simple does not mean easy. I finally understand what you meant." Lily smiled hopefully, watching both adults in complete silence. Charlotte looked directly at Ethan with quiet courage. Months ago you said I would make a wonderful bride. Today I would like to ask something instead. If the day ever comes when you believe the time is right, would you let me become part of your family's ordinary Saturdays for the rest of our lives? Ethan looked at the maple leaf, then at Lily's hopeful smile, and finally into Charlotte's eyes, realizing that she had crossed every distance between their worlds simply to stand beside him where he had always been. Several weeks later, the first snow of the season dusted the rooftops of the neighborhood as though the world itself had chosen to begin again. Saturday morning arrived with the familiar scent of fresh coffee drifting through the community center, cheerful greetings echoing across the entrance, and volunteers gathering for the annual holiday appreciation dinner after another successful season of serving local families. This time, Ethan, Lily, and Charlotte walked through the front doors together. Nobody saw a chief executive officer standing beside a maintenance worker. Nobody saw wealth beside modesty. They simply saw three people who had quietly become a family long before anyone had found the right words to describe it. Throughout the evening, volunteers shared homemade meals, children decorated gingerbread cookies, and neighbors laughed beneath warm string lights that reflected softly against the windows. Charlotte helped wash dishes beside retirees who had volunteered there for decades. Ethan carried folding tables back into storage with several teenagers who insisted on helping him. Lily proudly introduced Charlotte to every child as someone who always remembered their names and never forgot to listen. Before dessert, the community center director thanked everyone for another year of generosity and invited a few volunteers to share what the experience had meant to them. Charlotte stood slowly, looked around the room, and smiled with quiet gratitude. "The greatest lesson I learned this year did not come from a boardroom," she said gently. "It came from ordinary people who showed me that dignity grows through service, kindness becomes stronger when it is shared, and the richest life is built one generous moment at a time." The room answered with warm applause before gradually becoming quiet again. Charlotte then turned toward Ethan with calm sincerity. "Months ago, you saw me before you knew anything about my career. When the truth finally arrived, you stepped back because you believed you were protecting me. Instead, you reminded me what real love looks like. It does not hold on tightly. It chooses what is best for someone else, even when it hurts." Ethan felt every eye in the room settle upon them, yet he remained exactly as he had always been, humble, steady, and honest. He reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed the pressed maple leaf he had carried since that autumn afternoon in the park. Charlotte quietly opened her notebook and revealed the matching leaf she had protected all those months. A gentle wave of surprise moved through the room before everything fell completely silent. Without rehearsed speeches or dramatic promises, Ethan smiled and took Charlotte's hand. "You once asked if you could become part of our ordinary Saturdays," he said softly. "The truth is, you already have. If you are still willing, I would be honored to spend every ordinary day that follows beside you." Charlotte's eyes filled with grateful tears as she nodded with a joyful smile. Lily wrapped her arms around both of them, laughing as volunteers wiped away happy tears of their own. No cameras flashed. No headlines were written. No one cared about company titles or financial success. In that quiet room, surrounded by neighbors who believed kindness mattered more than status, the greatest miracle was not that a successful woman had chosen a humble single father. It was that two people who met through simple acts of service had discovered the rare kind of love built on respect, grace, second chances, and the quiet dignity to always see the person before the position. And for one beautiful moment, the entire room remained peacefully silent because everyone understood they had just witnessed something far more valuable than success. They had witnessed a family finding its way home.